I'm JP Tuesday.
And I'm Kiki Cannon. As lifelong Disney fans, the work of countless talented Disney creatives have shaped our lives.
Now, as the Disney catalog expands, we're taking a journey through film and television to discover if that spark that shaped us as children lives on in adulthood.
Does your favorite Disney media still cast that same spell? Join us as we find out. We are Rewatching the Magic. Through dangers untold and hardships unnumbered, I have fought my way here to the castle beyond the Goblin City. For my will is as strong as yours, and my kingdom is as great.
Hey, Kiki, what you doing?
You have no power over me, Tuesday.
Yes. We are still talking about the year 1986 here on the podcast, our little summer break from the Disney stuff for a while. But Jim Henson related, the movie Labyrinth, starring David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly. And David Bowie in those tight tights, I'm guaranteeing it was somebody's awakening.
I mean, like an entire generation counts as somebody, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is like David Bowie was such a massive, towering figure, and still is, that it was so shocking to me. I got to go see the Labyrinth exhibition at the Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta, and they like one of the Jareth costumes, and they had one of Sarah's costumes and everything. And it's so amazing to realize, like, what a small of physique man he was in 1986. I looked at the mannequin and the costume, and I was like, that like, it's so tiny looking, you know, as far as like just the slenderness of him was kind of shocking. It was like really the most shocking thing in the exhibition to me.
So it's like, you see him like doing like, I don't know, Under Pressure with Freddie Mercury. You kind of see their stances and their physiques next to each other. And also Jennifer Connelly was a teenager at the time of this filming. So yeah.
I believe she was 14 when they filmed this.
Also, they use a lot of camera tricks to make Jareth appear larger than life in the movie.
That it was just David Bowie, you know? For everybody that came into personal contact with him, they all said, that there was just like a presence, that had nothing to do with necessarily his physicality, but he just exuded something that made you stop. I mean,
we would call that aura today.
Well, yeah, I mean, we would have called it aura back then too, but like, it just, like, he always seemed larger than life to people who met him. And that really comes across with Jareth. The thing is, I had always heard that when Jim Henson was developing this movie, one of the things he wanted to do was to have a big pop or rock star to play Jareth and to write music for the movie. The thing is that Bowie was not the one in his mind when he was like first developing it. He was thinking more somebody like, Michael Jackson, who was at the height of his fame really around that time.
And he would have worked with a lot of people who worked on this film doing various music videos as well as Captain EO for Disneyland.
Yeah, but it turns out that the reason that they ended up on Bowie was that Jim Henson's son, John, who has, now unfortunately passed, but John Henson was apparently a huge fan of David Bowie and was the one who recommended him. And when Jim met with him to discuss, would you be interested in a project like this? He was really drawn to what Jim Henson called the otherworldliness that David Bowie just, had in most of his onstage personas and kind of carried into real life. And so after meeting with him, it seems he was kind of sold.
I mean, it's not too far in a way from a movie that Bowie had done 10 years prior to this, The Man That Fell to Earth.
Yeah, which is the Man That Fell to Earth is not everybody's cup of tea, even in the Bowie fan community. But that is a more intellectual film. It tries to be more avant-garde and deeper in what it says about humanity and the soul and, our world and stuff like that. So it is a very slow, thinky movie. Labyrinth is, it might appeal to a lot of the same type of people. It definitely, I like both of them.
This is more fairy tale than anything else.
But this is a fairy tale, and also one of the reasons why Labyrinth is the way it is because Jim Henson had done The Dark Crystal, just a couple of years before this. And The Dark Crystal had been not well received.
It was a hard bomb. Let's be real. Cult classic today, but was not well received at the time.
And it wasn't just that the audience didn't show up for Dark Crystal. It was that most of the critics and stuff didn't get it and what Jim and the crew were trying to go for as far as the storytelling and the world building.
Also, I mean, if the movie had been released as Henson wanted it, it wouldn't have even had been released in English. It was going to be either all silent characters or a made up language for the movie with no subtitles.
Yeah, and and it's kind of, we saw how well that went over in large portions of the Star Wars holiday special where all you're just hearing is Sherry Wook. But the thing about it was that Jim got kind of depressed after Dark Crystal bombed. And he was like, okay, well, people want the more Muppety Jim Henson and less the avant-garde filmmaker Jim Henson. And so let's give them like the avant-garde filmmaker Jim Henson in a more Muppety style.
Yeah, I mean, we've mentioned this before, but his short film Timepiece. If you've never seen Jim Henson's short film Timepiece, it is a mind F in the purest sense of the word, in the best sense of the word.
Yeah, it is an incredible piece of filmmaking. And to think that he did all of the stuff he did completely practically. He didn't have any of the digital tools that people have today.
I mean, and that whole, theatrical film chronology, we have the Muppet movie, which was Jim's attempt to put a finale on the Muppet Show era. He was going to retire those characters. They were going to be gone. He was going to move on to other things. And he does The Dark Crystal. And people go into that expecting, we like the Muppet movie. So this is going to be like another Muppet movie.
It's going to be all singing, all dancing extravaganza. And then they get this really heavy film about like apocalypse on a fantasy world and stuff like that.
And between those two films, you get The Great Muppet Caper, which, when we go back to our Great Muppet Caper episode, Jim did not want to make that movie. He wanted to make The Dark Crystal, but the studio would not allow that to happen until he did Muppet Movie 2, which ended up being The Great Muppet Caper. So he takes the proceeds from, take all the profits from Great Muppet Caper and puts it towards The Dark Crystal. Dark Crystal bombs.
And, does not make a penny of any of that money back.
So now he has to go back Now he has to go back to the Muppets again and does the Muppets Take Manhattan.
Yeah.
And then he takes success from the Muppets Take Manhattan and puts it to another one of his passion projects, this being Labyrinth.
The thing is that, Muppets Take Manhattan was not the most financially successful Muppet movie. So even what he got from that was not enough to make Labyrinth. So he had to turn to an old collaborator of his. This guy you may have heard of named George Lucas. Don't know if that name rings a bell.
I was going to come to that because this brings together four things that really formed our childhood or our younger years, should I say. You have Jim Henson. You have the storytelling of Jim Henson. You have George Lucas as executive producer with ILM doing some of the special effects. The script is written by Terry Jones of Monty Python fame,
with some script doctoring uncredited by Elaine May. That is one of the things that not a lot of people know, but the same woman that did like The Birdcage with Robin Williams and Tootsie with Dustin Hoffman and stuff, she came in for like a final script doctor and punched up some of the material and all, and it's because she never got credited, it's not like one of the most well-known facts about the movie, but Terry Jones and Elaine May were responsible for a lot of my humor as a kid.
and combine that with David Bowie.
Yeah.
That all of those pieces put together are pieces of things that make up the bulk of both of our younger years.
Yeah. So as we're recording this, we have kind of just passed the 40th anniversary of this film. And 10 years ago, when they were celebrating the 30th anniversary, I actually got to go to one of the big 30th anniversary things that they did for Labyrinth, which
So did I. Yeah.
well, we went to different ones.
Yeah.
But the one I went to was Dragon Con had a huge Labyrinth 30th anniversary panel that they did, and it was held in kind of, if you're familiar with Comic-Con, you know that all the big panels take place in Hall H. It was kind of Dragon Con's version of Hall H. It's their biggest venue, their big, where they stick all the things that they know people are going to be swarming for. And so it was easily a couple of thousand people in that panel. And it was Brian Henson and Karen Prell. Karen Prell, if you're a Muppet fan, I mean, we've mentioned her before because she was in other projects we've talked about before, but you primarily know her work on Fraggle Rock and stuff like that. But in here, she's the lead puppeteer for both the Worm and kind of Trash Lady toward the end. And then, of course, Brian Henson worked a lot behind the scenes, but of course, he's kind of most famous for voicing and puppeteering Hoggle in this. So I got to see them talk about the 30th anniversary. And the thing that really, really stuck with me that Brian said about Labyrinth was he said that the thing that really breaks his heart to this day is that Jim died thinking Labyrinth was a failure. And what he didn't realize was that all the people who really needed Labyrinth had not reached the age for Labyrinth to be the important thing in their life until just after Jim passed. It was the right movie released at the wrong time. And it really, once he said that, because I don't think I realized like how horrible that idea is, because this movie came out in 86 and Henson passed 4 years later in 1990. And so it had not had time for the audience that would eventually be the main audience, like us, I had not even seen Labyrinth or heard of Labyrinth by the time Jim Henson died. And Jim Henson was such an influence on me. Okay. And so the idea that this really was a passion project for him, it wasn't anything he did out of contractual obligation, much like Dark Crystal. This was one of those things where he was like, okay, I'll kind of marry the two sides of my personality into this movie. The one that likes the silly, goofy, musical side, and the one that likes this kind of surrealist, boundary pushing kind of stuff, you know? And the fact that he basically put his heart out there and thought that the world rejected it.
And this was the first of 3 heartbreaks in a row for Jim Henson. It was Labyrinth, and then it was The Storyteller. He put his heart and soul into the Storyteller, the TV show The Storyteller, and nobody wanted it. Like, it aired in England, but he tried to get it to air in the US, and no network wanted it because they wanted The Muppets. Eventually, Storyteller would air in the US as part of the Jim Henson Hour, but that was still, half the show is still The Muppets, Kermit and Friends, which was not really what he wanted. And the third strike here is a very, very niche show. A show I guarantee you no one listening to this podcast has ever heard of. It is a 1989 one-season show called The Ghost of Fafner Hall. Have you ever heard of this show?
Heard of it, but I haven't gotten the chance to see anything about it. I mean, any of it, excuse me.
It was the TV show follow-up to Fraggle Rock. It aired on HBO. It only lasted one season. It was about this ghost that haunted a music hall. And every episode was going to be about a different form of music that would have different musicians guest starring on the show to learn about music. And it never caught on. And it was canceled after one season. So here's Jim putting all of his heart, all of his soul into these 3 projects and just getting rejected. So of course you would understand Jim's mindset of, I need to get rid of the crutch that is the Muppets so I can actually be recognized for the stuff that I want to be recognized for, you know?
Yeah. And it wasn't, we don't mean to suggest that Jim was ever like ashamed of the Muppets, but the Muppets did become kind of too big for any one person.
Kind of in the same way Sesame Street, became. It's like Jim Henson became known as the kid puppet show guy, and he never wanted to be that.
Yeah. I think one of the reasons why Labyrinth kind of did not hit with the correct audience at the correct time is because there was such a misunderstanding about Jim and his art. I mean, it persists even to today, but it was even worse when he was alive, that he was the children's entertainer. So Labyrinth comes out and people are thinking like, okay, this movie is going to be for like little children. You're going to take your like 7 to 10-year-old to this. But like, I ended up seeing Labyrinth for the first time when I was a teenager. And the way this hits, if you watch this movie for the first time when you are a teenager, is just something altogether different. I think if I'd have seen this movie at like age 10, this movie would have just been like, okay, that's cute. I like, the worm is funny, and I like Ludo, and there's certain things that would appeal to like a younger kid. But if you see it and you're approximately Sarah's age, boy, does it hit different.
Yeah, I did see this on cable when I was a kid. And yeah, the lake is farting, and that's funny.
Yeah, it's like, oh, the bog of eternal stench makes fart noises. Ha ha. That's kind of what you take away from it if you see it at too young of an age. But if you see it when you're approximately the age Sarah is supposed to be in this movie, everything about what she's going through hits you right at the core, you know? She's dealing with her parents not understanding her. She's a child of divorce. She's, worried about the inherent unfairness of the world. She is coming into adulthood and she wants to stay in that world of fantasy because it's easier and things are clearer.
In the world of fantasy, you know who the good guys are and you know who the bad guys are.
And almost inevitably, the good guys always win. It's a lot of people call her like petulant or whiny because of her repeated, like, it's not fair, But the thing is that I don't think it's whininess at the beginning of the movie. I think it's that phase that pretty much every kid goes through at some point, which is that, like, and it's something I don't think I've ever grown out of, honestly, which is that you look at the world and you're like, there's so much beauty here and so much that could be great. And then, like, we let crappy humans ruin it all. And why did we do that? Why do we continue to do that? And why haven't we just stepped up and punched that evil in the nose or whatever,
Why do bad people keep getting away with doing bad things? Why are bad people rewarded for doing bad things?
Yeah, it's like, in the real world, such as in most stories, it's kind of like there's one villain and a whole bunch of people on the side of the good guys. So why does the villain keep winning in the real world, And I think, every time I watch this movie, I think when you watch it for the first time, you're like, wow, what a whiny little kid. But I think when you watch it more and more, her complaints kind of take on a deeper meaning, because she's right, like the labyrinth shouldn't be changing all the time. If she's meant to solve it, like, you can't solve a game that doesn't have clear rules. It's like, how are you going to win a game if the rules keep changing all the time? It is not fair.
You can't change the rules in the middle of the game, but that is how it is in the real world, unfortunately. One side will always move the goalposts further and further to justify their viewpoint.
Yeah. And so I think when you look at it on a surface level, she does come across as like, wow, aren't you a whiny baby? But I think it is really just a reflection of what all of us have to go through at some point of realizing, like, well, it's not fair, but it is the way it is, and I have to deal with these challenges on their terms and not mine. And also, like, even for this rewatch, and this is, of all the movies we've watched, this may have been the one I've seen the most in my life. It's either this or maybe Beauty and the Beast. I can't tell you in sheer numbers which one I have seen through more times. But I will tell you.
You could probably recite the entire movie from memory if I let you.
I can, but I can also do that with Beauty and the Beast. So, it's one of those things. The thing is like, we watch stuff on streaming, and I gotta tell you, right now is the best time for streaming. And Labyrinth, this may be the most accessible film we have ever discussed. It is on, like, do you have a streaming service? Any streaming service? Labyrinth is on your streaming service. I guarantee it. Labyrinth is on streaming services I didn't even know existed until today when I was looking up where all is this streaming. I didn't even need to watch this on streaming because I have like 4 different physical copies of this movie in different formats. Like, I still have it on VHS, I have it on DVD, I think I have 2 different Blu-rays, because I have the standard release and then I have the 30th anniversary special edition release. But that would have required going into the other room and grabbing a disc and putting it in a DVD player. So I just watched it on Disney Plus, as I'm sure you did.
I actually just took out my DVD copy of the movie and watched it because I haven't actually watched the DVD. I haven't actually pulled it off my shelf in a while and said, I could watch it in streaming, but let me actually take the physical copy out and put it in.
For you, I was too lazy to even walk into the other room and get the copy. But yeah, I mean, if you have not seen Labyrinth at all, or if you have not seen Labyrinth in a long time, pause this now. We'll still be here when you get back. Go to like any streaming service. Labyrinth is going to be on there. It's on like Tubi. It's on
Netflix. It's on Hulu. It's on Peacock. It's on YouTube. It's on the Roku channel. It's on Pluto TV. It's on the Shout Factory network.
It's on like basically everywhere. And go watch it. It's not a long movie. It's like just about 100 minutes, I think. And it's so great and so fun, and you're not going to regret it. And then come back to us, because we're not going to do like a blow by blow of the plot or anything. Here's the plot. A little girl wishes that her annoying baby brother would get taken away by goblins. And like a recent film where somebody makes a wish they didn't think would work, and there are horrible, horrible consequences to it, her wish actually works. And she ends up having to go solve the Goblin King's labyrinth to get her baby brother back. And it turns out at the end, the real labyrinth was the friends we made along the way. There's the plot. We're done with summary.
This movie follows, like I said it's a fairy tale, and it follows so many fairy tale tropes. The girl lost in a magical world, to the point where if you watch, keep your eye on Sarah's room. You see The Wizard of Oz, you see Snow White, you see books of Grimm fairy tales. So, and there are so many influences of The Wizard of Oz, of Alice in Wonderland, and so many of those other girl gets trapped in a magical world.
Yeah. And one of the interesting things in there that a lot of people miss is that on her bookshelf, very prominently shown, is Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. And if you watch the credits to the very end, you'll see a note that says, Jim Henson wishes to acknowledge the influence of the works of Maurice Sendak.
One of the songs was actually based on Where the Wild Things Are. The Fire Gang song. Bowie wrote that kind of inspired by the book.
Yeah, Chilly Down. But, I want to say that watching this again, and unlike most things we watch, it has not been that long since I've seen this. And like you said, I can just close my eyes and play the movie. But the thing is that, I'm like, okay, I'm in my mid-40s now. This is going to hit different. And I was surprised at like how not different it really impacted me. Like, you watch the movie and you're like, well, when I get older, I'll probably relate to the parents or whatever. But no, her parents are horrible. I stand by that, Like, her stepmother is like, she's going to treat me like the wicked stepmother in every fairy story till the day I die. And it's like, well, stop acting like the wicked stepmother.
I think that when it comes to the parents, we are seeing them through Sarah's eyes.
I mean, maybe.
That's the vibe I get. Because, it's the mother and the stepmother and the father, they're going out for something. We're never told what. And Sarah is just expected to babysit her little brother. And she gets, why do I gotta do that? You guys are always going out.
We never go out. And then when we go out, we make sure that it won't interfere with any of your plans. But you never have planned, you friendless little oaf. Like, my God, woman, shut up.
But it's also kind of interesting that, if you go through Sarah's room, you see, again, you have to pause it. They don't spend enough, the camera does not spend enough time on it, but there's Sarah's scrapbook of her mom. And her mom was this actor, which explains why Sarah is always reciting stories and wearing costumes and stuff. Because that's her mom. Her mom was an actor.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, her mom actually has a name and all, and there is a backstory to her mom, but bless the time when movies actually thought their audience had a brain instead of the current Netflix thing of, like, I'm going to repeat our motivations and the plot constantly because we just assume you're on your phone and not paying attention to the movie, you know?
To be fair, they actually are just on their phone and don't pay attention to the movie.
Not everybody, but the thing is that if you pay attention, and it is easy to miss the first time because the camera doesn't exactly linger on any of it. But when you look closely and like pause and stare at the clippings in Sarah's scrapbook and on her mirror, you realize that her mom went off to kind of focus on her career, you know?
And have
And
a relationship with one of her co-stars.
a man named Jeremy, who is also played by David Bowie and looks a lot like Jareth. Yeah.
So, yeah, it would kind of explain why it adds to the quote Wizard of Oz of it that Jareth looks like her basically stepfather, her mother's new love.
Who she may have never even met because there are not pictures of like her and her mom and Jeremy and stuff like, you know, it's that she has to have these like clippings, and it's not clippings that give you the sense of like, I'm proud of my mom and her, like what she's done in her life. You get the sense that it is like, well, I haven't seen my mom in 5 years. Better look in the newspaper and see what she's done, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You get the feeling that Sarah's mom almost kind of abandoned her, but that she loved her mom enough to have this kind of fantasy life around her. Depending on which of the like tie-in merchandise you read, you know, there's been comic books, there's been novels, there's been all kinds of stuff. Depending on kind of what you read, there is a sense that either like her mom was just too busy, or a sense that her mom really just was like, my career is too important. I can't deal with, you know, a child. Here, husband, you take care of the child, you know?
And we don't know how long they've been divorced.
At least long enough for her father to hook up with a new woman and for them to have Toby, because that is her stepbrother. And so it is fascinating to kind of look at this family dynamic that we're never really told about, but we are shown.
So, I mean, like I said, the Wizard of Oz, I mean, going back to my original comment of, you know, the Wizard of Oz of it, you know, does this movie all take place in Sarah's mind? Because the Goblin King story, our introduction to Sarah is her reciting this monologue from her favorite book, The Goblin King.
Well, it's actually a play called Labyrinth.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, this play called Labyrinth, she probably saw her mother in, probably co-starring with this co-star that looks like David Bowie. And she goes through the entire monologue, probably her mother's monologue, and she becomes obsessed with this story. She has she has a bookend of Hoggle.
She has a statue of Jareth sitting on her desk, which a lot of people miss, you know, if they're just casually watching it.
Yeah, so like she becomes obsessed with this story of Labyrinth, possibly because, you know, her mother and her, you know, stepfather or whatever. I don't know. The one newspaper clipping I saw said on again, off again romance. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of the versions of Labyrinth as a story have the mom married to Jeremy, you know?
This man she's with, I guess. We'll just go with that.
You know, it's her boyfriend, and it's fine. And it also seems to be like her dashing co-star, you know?
Yeah. So, like, she becomes obsessed with it. So, does all of this exist in Sarah's head? Her imagining Jareth looking like this, this Jeremy guy, and just imagining herself in her mother's role in the story of Labyrinth.
Yeah, and the Wizard of Oz comparison is fascinating because, as we've mentioned before when we've talked about stories based on the Oz books, that whole "it was a dream" thing was an invention of the Judy Garland film. In the Oz books, Oz is a very real place. So she has the novel, The Wizard of Oz, but we don't see any tie-ins to the movie. And I know that's because, like, the movie is under different copyright and stuff, but there is a idea that you can take it as either this was all Sarah's dream, that she had a dream while babysitting her annoying brother, or you can take it as Jareth using whatever he can, because he is a shapeshifter. We know that from the movie. He can shapeshift into the barn owl form and stuff. But he's also the Goblin King, and he doesn't look like any of the goblins, which I think is another hint to Jareth's shapeshifting. He is shapeshifting into the form that would be most alluring to. And given what we see of Sarah at the beginning of the movie and what little we know about her mother, I think the idea is that she wants the glamorous life her mother is leading. She's stuck in a small town, because we do see her run through it. It is very small. It looks like a New England town, maybe. And so, she's stuck in this small town with her, father who just has a normal day job, and her stepmother probably is either a stay-at-home mother or has a normal day job, and her really annoying baby brother who she's kind of expected to raise, it seems. And instead she looks at her mom and she's like, well, mom gets to travel all over the world and perform for audiences and be, whatever, and have this glamorous boyfriend. And we know from what her stepmother is insulting her at the beginning of the movie that Sarah doesn't have a boyfriend. She's probably never had a boyfriend. It's like, even though she's about 14, and that's, most kids that age are having their first relationships in some form. And it seems that Sarah's development has been stunted in that way by, who knows if it's just because she's in a small town and there's nobody there, or it's, she's the weird kid and nobody wants to be around her,
I mean, the implication is that she still plays with dolls and still plays dress up. And that's probably why she's doesn't have a lot of friends, because we don't see her hanging out with any other kids.
Yeah, Sarah is not a millennial, but man, is she millennial coded.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh girl, you were just born in the wrong time. If you'd have been born a few years later, you would have grown up with the rest of us who still at our age play with dolls and play dress up
and talk about kids movies on a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of weirdos are our entire generation,
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about, is Jareth using his power to mimic the things she was already attracted to in her life, or is this all some dream she had? Is that there was an earlier version of this script that kind of made it more obvious that the answer was Jareth is using his power. Because there was a version where she was reading a different play, it had a different title or whatever, and it wasn't as central to the plot, whereas the lines she is reading at the beginning are the lines she uses to defeat Jareth. But in the original script, it was just Jareth was focused on Sarah and wanted a way into her life. So he pretended and shapeshifted into the form of the author of the play she was obsessed with, and used that as a way to gain entry into her house and take her brother. Instead of sending like goblin minions, Jareth would have shown up himself to steal the child, and he would have used his like, hey, I'm the author of your favorite play, to have her like, invite him into the house so that he could do that. So I kind of still go with the idea personally that this was a thing that Sarah and by extension Toby experienced, and that Jareth is just a very powerful goblin, wizard, whatever you want to call him, who used his great power to watch Sarah, because we see him watching her before she ever makes the wish, in the owl form at the beginning of the movie. Would kind of like probably sit on a branch outside her bedroom window and look at all the things in her room. Because if you look in her room, not only does she have all these books with tropes about girl getting whisked away to a fantastical place or whatever, but all of the imagery of the labyrinth is already present in her room. The fireys are taken from one of her stuffed animals. The dog, Ambrosius, looks like her family dog, Merlin. She has MC Escher posters and little board games of labyrinths and mazes. She has all these images of Jareth. She has images of goblins and dwarves, and there is something that looks like Ludo on her shelf.
The bookend is just straight up Hoggle.
Yeah, and that maquette on her desk absolutely is Jareth's, just with a more generic face. It's got the same makeup and the same clothing and same hair. So it's obvious that Jareth like looked at that and all sitting next to the image of her mother's boyfriend and was like, okay, that's where I'm getting that from. So in my mind, this is a thing that happened, and Jareth is just, kind of a weird stalker. That's the thing she likes.
There's a fan theory that Jareth tends to have a type of girl he goes after because of one line. When Sarah introduces herself to Hoggle, she says, "I'm Sarah." And Hoggle responds, "Of course you are." So the implication, again, the fan theory is that she's not the first girl to be taken into the labyrinth, but all of the girls have been named Sarah. That at some point, Jareth had fallen in love with a girl named Sarah that just happened to look like Jennifer Connelly. And all of the girls have that, dark hair, young look, and they're all named Sarah. And all of these girls have come into the labyrinth at some point. Again, nothing in the movie, other than that one line, there's nothing in the movie to support that, but it is one of my favorite fan theories of the movie.
Yeah, and there are, things that there's kind of a related fan theory that Jareth at some point in his youth, because most people consider that Jareth is probably just unimaginably old. And the thing is that the related fan theory is that Jareth had a love named Sarah who had a lot of qualities in common with the Sarah Williams that we see in the movie, and that she did in fact remind him of the babe. So that he ran across this girl somewhere in his travels, and she reminded him so much of a previous lost love who may have even shared her name. The interesting thing is that there is a novelization, that kind of, it's out of print and it's like impossible to find. If you ever find like an actual print version of the novelization, like, my goodness, get it, because it's so rare. I've only ever seen one copy in person, but, fans have, like, typed out the entire thing and, like, put it online. So even though it's been out of print for decades, you can read the entire text online. But it does kind of go into a lot more of Jarrett's motivation and a lot more of Sarah's backstory. And while it doesn't like spell a connection, it does bring up both like it is where we get the names of Sarah's mom and her boyfriend. I mentioned that her mom had a name, and then I realized I never said the name. Her mom's name is Linda. So I don't know if it's Linda Williams or just
the newspaper clipping does say Linda Williams
okay.
on again, off again relationship.
Yeah, and then his name is Jeremy. I don't know if we ever get a last name for him, but yeah, the thing is that the novel, which was the official tie-in for the movie and was based on the screenplay, it kind of goes more into like the backstory of her family, including like whole sections where she actually has interactions with Linda and Jeremy, which the movie does not ever show us, of course. And also one of the things that the book does that the movie fortunately did not do was that Jareth talks of love in the movie, but this is a adult male actor and a like 13, 14-year-old female actor, And fortunately, Jim Henson was aware of that, but in the novel, Jareth actually does make a pass at her and like attempts to kiss her and stuff, and she's like immediately like, "Oh my goodness, gross! You are an adult man."
Closest we get is their dance in that one sequence, and him saying, all I ask for you is to be obedient to me, and I will be your slave.
Yeah, the most that they ever come to any sort of romantic physicality is in the ballroom sequence, choreographed amazingly by the legendary Gates McFadden, who you will better know as Dr. Beverly Crusher on Star Trek: The Next Generation. She is credited by her birth name of Cheryl in this film, if you look at the credits. So when it says choreography by Cheryl McFadden, that is in fact who it's talking about. If you watch a lot of the like behind the scenes making of stuff or look up behind the scenes photographs, you can actually see her working with David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly on the choreography. Pretty cool if you are both a Star Trek fan and a fan of Labyrinth. But yeah, and she was in her choreography, she was very good to make it what is obviously on Jarrett's part an attempt at a seduction of some sort. Maybe not a physical seduction, but don't you want to stay in this world? Isn't this what you've always dreamed of? But also, if you look at the choreography, there is never anything in that choreography that is not age appropriate for a grown man dancing with a teenage girl, which is a very fine line to walk,
Yeah. You mentioned that the original idea was to make this a bit more darker in the vein of the Dark Crystal. The reason it gets a little lighter is a person that I do want to talk about for just a second, Brian Froud, who is listed as a co-creator on this movie. He does get a special credit for like character names and such, based on characters by Brian Froud. So he is the co-creator of this movie. He created all of the character names. He is the one that decided that the creatures should be goblins. And it is his son Toby that plays Toby in the movie.
Yeah, Toby Froud has the best joke about his life, which is, I met David Bowie and the first thing I did was pee on him. Because that's actually a true story, is that they were like, oh, we're going to have, Brian's son Toby be, the little boy in the movie. And so they like dressed him up and they handed, infant Toby over to David Bowie. And the first thing that happened was he peed on him.
That's a blessing in the Latin culture. That's considered a blessing.
Well, I guess David was very, very blessed in that. Yeah, Brian Froud, he is an interesting one to talk about. He worked with Henson on several projects, and he worked on The Dark Crystal. He worked on The Storyteller. Brian Froud actually met his wife, Wendy Froud, on the set of Dark Crystal. Like when they both worked on Dark Crystal. And the thing is that, so Brian Froud and Wendy Froud meet on the set of Dark Crystal. They get married and they have an infant son who just happens to be the right age when they need to cast for Labyrinth. And it's kind of fascinating. The thing is that if you like the look of Labyrinth and Dark Crystal, which Brian Froud had massive hand in, you need to go look at the art books that the Frouds have released, which I think is called like The World of Froud or something like that. I'm forgetting the name of the book exactly, but incredible stuff in there that has a lot of like early conceptual sketches for Dark Crystal and Labyrinth, but also just has like unrelated art that Brian and Wendy did. And it is so fascinating. If you love that style, go look that up.
So he is just as much a creative force in this movie as Jim Henson is. And, because Jim Henson is such a big name when it comes to these kind of movies, everything else kind of gets forgotten. And I wanted to mention Brian Froud in that regard. He is just as much responsible for the story of this movie as Henson or Lucas or Terry Jones or anyone else.
Yeah, he also was a massive hand in the design of Jareth's costumes and the look of that. So if you ever grew up being like, I want to cosplay Jareth one day, or Jareth has really good fashion sense, thank Brian Froud, because apparently a lot of that comes from his sketches of the character.
Definitely has that 80s rock star quality to it, especially the wig that they have David Bowie wear for this.
Yeah, that wig is definitely something. The really interesting thing is that, you don't know sometimes how much of this stuff comes from the fact that they cast David Bowie, or if it was kind of always expected to be that, but Bowie was like considered one of the like central glam rock figures. And when Jareth enters, what is the thing that comes along with his entrance? It is a shower of glitter. I mean, literal glitter, that they like blew up in fans to like coat the air and the room
worked.
that Toby is in.
It's work because if you watch the film, the owl flies into the room, then all of a sudden you see the shadow change shape from the owl. Well, you don't really see the shape change. You can see David Bowie kind of sitting up behind the camera as his shadow casts. His very large shadow casts onto the floor, and then there's the glitter. So the implication is that this is the effect of his transformation, his shape-shifting.
Yeah, like you said, Lucas and the ILM team were responsible for some of the stuff in this film.
That CGI owl during the opening credits.
Yeah, there is a little bit of, CGI and visual trickery, but the majority of this movie is practical effects. And going back and looking at this film 40 years later and realizing how precise and how well these practical effects have held up. And then looking at that like early, pre-Toy Story CGI, that early stuff that ILM was kind of screwing around with at the time. And it's like, maybe we should stick more to physical practical effects,
Speaking of physical practical effects, Michael Motion, professional juggler, he's the one that does the hand movements with the crystal ball.
Yeah, the contact juggling, yeah.
Yeah, he is. That is his hand. Literally, he is standing behind David Bowie, lifting his hand underneath that cloak doing the motions as David Bowie is moving his body to make it look like he's actually doing it.
Yeah, and keep in mind that Michael Motion I do not believe they had a monitor or anything because of the way they had to hide him in the costuming. And so that contact juggling that you see him do, he is doing just literally by touch at that point and muscle memory, because he cannot see what his hands or the balls are doing.
He is in the movie in the flesh, but from behind. Like, he's in David Bowie's costume. He's wearing David Bowie's wig as he does the juggle with both hands in that one bit part of the bedroom scene.
Yeah.
But whenever you see him do it and you see David Bowie's face, that is literally him behind David Bowie, sticking his arm in front of him. And it's two actors trying to make it look seamless.
And it does. I mean, if you had never told me that I would have just assumed that David Bowie learned contact juggling for this movie. The interesting thing is one of the other things that I'm surprised holds up so well is the animatronics on Hoggle. Because Hoggle is such an important character in this film. And Hoggle was one of their early attempts at animatronics with, the Henson Company doing that. They'd been doing it a little bit on Fraggle Rock. They'd done some of it in The Dark Crystal. But this was the point in time where they were just starting that animatronic puppetry rig that they developed.
To make it look as lifelike as possible, blinking eyes, moving eyebrows, the mouth moving in a realistic way. Stuff that they would reuse just a few years later for the first Ninja Turtles movie.
Yeah, and of course, they really kind of perfected it for the TV show Dinosaurs, which we've talked about before. But the thing is that Hoggle was a mix of a performer in a suit. Her name was Sherry Weiser. She had also worked on Follow That Bird, which they had done just a year before. She was one of the Dodos. She was Marie Dodo. And then she worked as Hoggle in Labyrinth. I'm not. She had other credits in Hollywood, but I think those were the only two she worked with the Henson Company on. But the thing is that she was a performer who had dwarfism. She was a little person, and so they put her in the suit, the costume and stuff, and then the head of Hoggle is an animatronic head. And you'll notice in the movie that there's a lot of points where Sarah takes Hoggle's hand in certain scenes. And it's not just because Sarah and Hoggle are besties or anything. It's because Sherry, the performer, could not really see when she was wearing the Hoggle mask. So scenes like them running from the cleaners in the tunnel and everything, you'll notice that Jennifer Connelly is holding Sherry's hand the entire time. And it's to keep her from literally running into the walls, which happened a lot, apparently, in the behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to anyone who worked on this movie or worked on the Turtles movie or worked on Dinosaurs or even Fraggle Rock, it gets very hot in those suits. Even Carol Spinney, who was playing Big Bird, he would talk about how hot it got in the Big Bird suit.
Yeah, they literally had fans rigged up inside the Big Bird suit so that he would not pass out and die. Sherry had it a little easier on Labyrinth in the fact that Hoggle's costume is literally just kind of a costume. I think they put a little padding here and there to kind of like disguise her chest and make her look more masculine and stuff. But like
and
for the
gloves,
Yeah, and she has the gloves to match the face so that it's not like normal human hands and then this like very different textured face. So she is wearing, like latex prosthetic gloves and everything. But as far as the clothing, it's kind of just the same sort of clothing you'd give any actor as far as costuming. But the big problem was having that animatronic head on. There are built into the Hoggle mask little slits that are hidden in the kind of wrinkles and folds and stuff where she could see out of, but it was a very, very limited view of like literally what was directly in front of her, which was why she kept bumping into like bits of the set and stuff like that, because she did not have her entire periphery to know where everything was. She was like, okay, I'm literally not walking into the wall in front of me, but if there was one like 45 degrees out of her view, she tended to kind of walk in on that. So there's a lot of other performers that you'll see that kind of like will put a hand on Hoggle's shoulder or hold his hand or, touch him in some other way. And it's literally they were touching Sherry because she couldn't see or hear where the other performers were, and they needed to let her know which way to orient her body to make it look like Hoggle was looking at them.
And there's a great story about the Hoggle suit, costume, puppet. So after the movie had wrapped up and they were kind of shipping everything, because, Henson filmed all of his stuff in England. So they were shipping all this stuff back to the States, and they lost the Hoggle suit. And it was lost for 10 years. Sometime in the late 90s, they find it. And it's in lost luggage at an airport because it had been stored in basically a suitcase for 10 years, not properly stored. So the headpiece is deteriorating. If you ever want to see, look up the pictures of when they found this thing. It was not taken care of because it was locked in a box for 10 years with no proper circulation or anything. But they eventually found it. Luckily, somebody associated with lost luggage realized what they had, and they were able to get a professional puppet maker to kind of restore the outfit, the head, the costume, everything, restore it, and it is currently on display at the National Lost Luggage Museum. I am surprised they have never made an attempt to return it to the Jim Henson Company.
Yeah, I mean, and the company has made other replicas of it over the years so that it can be shown. I think there was one in the exhibit I saw, but they don't have all of the animatronics and everything. The interesting thing about the original Lost Hoggle is because so much of the foam rubber and latex and stuff that made the skin was deteriorated by the time they found it. You can see parts of the animatronic framework underneath. It is slightly trauma-inducing to look at.
Very similar to someone, a similar story, someone finding one of the used turtle costumes from the movies. And again, because it was not properly stored, the foam and the latex had deteriorated, and you have this weird skeletal turtle head with all the wires and stuff in it.
Yeah, that one is far more nightmare-inducing. That's like, Five Nights at Freddy's kind of territory, the turtle one. The Hoggle one was in a little bit better shape when they found it, but it's at least still recognizable, and you don't have to have somebody tell you like, oh yeah, this is the skeleton of a Ninja Turtle. My favorite story that I've ever heard about the actual process of filming the Hoggle scenes actually came from Brian Henson in that talk that I saw him give. And it was kind of funny because he talked about the scene where it's just Jareth and Hoggle, and Jareth gives Hoggle the peach. And we are a PG-13 podcast, and we are allowed one F-bomb, and it is coming up here shortly. So if you listen with the littles and don't like that, maybe skip ahead 2 minutes or so. Anyway, but he told a story that they were filming that scene, and apparently because of the difficulty of what Sherry had to do and the kind of choreography of that scene, it was taking forever to film it. Because like I said, Sherry could see 2 degrees in front of her very slimly through like a very small slit. And
Yeah,
but the scene requires Hoggle to catch a peach that is thrown by Jareth.
Yeah, the scene goes, he throws the crystal, and then it cuts to Hoggle and he catches the peach.
Yeah. But it was literally when they filmed it, it's basically they were having to film it where, they were filming the close up of Hoggle and David was there. They had been filming both sides of the scene apparently. So David is there like throwing the peach. And so, David would throw it and Sherry would try to catch it and it would miss, and then like it's kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to kind of put my hands out and kind of aim for my hands and I'll try to catch it, And so they were trying to work on just the logistics of being able to get someone who can't see what is being thrown at them to catch it, And Hoggle took more, it wasn't just Sherry and then Brian Henson. Hoggle's face required like 6 puppeteers to kind of all work in coordination. Brian Henson was off to the side live performing the mouth movements and the voice to make sure that it stayed in sync. But like little things like the eyebrows and the eye blinks and the eye movements and stuff are being controlled by other people. So it's like there are like 6 people required to perform Hoggle in total. I think it was Sherry and then Brian and then 3 other puppeteers that were working on various like facial motions and stuff. And they all had to be in sync to do Hoggle.
Yeah, I love that Jim called it the Waldo, that little glove that they use to puppet the mouth.
Yeah, and those things are fascinating to watch, and they still use very similar things. And Brian Henson has now worked with the current team to actually like bring that into the digital age where they can use a very similar setup to puppet computer animated characters, which is super fascinating.
That's what Jim was doing for Muppet Vision 3D. And they still use the old puppeteering styles on the new Fraggle Rock.
Yeah.
But
But the thing is it was taking a long time to do that. And apparently it was so late at night. Everybody was hungry. Everybody was tired. Everybody was hot because they'd been under all the studio lights and everything. And so everybody's getting really punchy. And eventually they land the catch. But the thing is that Hoggle's direct line after catching it is, what is it? And apparently David Bowie was in such like an overexhausted state that they finally get the catch right. And Brian's like, okay, now. And he's like, what is it? And David just puts his hands on his hips and goes, it's a fucking peach. What do you think? And everybody laughed because it came out of nowhere. And then Sherry was like, David, I finally caught it. And apparently, every time they would land the catch, David couldn't help himself but repeat that again after. And eventually, Sherry was like ready to strangle him. And she was like, why are you messing this? You're making this last longer. I can't do it.
David Bowie dies in 1986, strangled by a little person.
Yeah, it would have been the way he wanted to go, just like Carrie Fisher, who died strangled in Moonlight by her own bra.
But I would wonder, they did why not film it in reverse? Because they would do this twice in the movie, mostly involving that crystal. One would have to make sense because it's literally the crystal bouncing upstairs and landing in Toby's hands. So why not film Toby dropping the crystal and it falling downstairs? And the other time is literally the crystal rolling into David Bowie's hands.
Yeah, one of those holds up better than the other, I'm going to say.
I can forgive one because it's a toddler.
Yeah, it's like the toddler did not know he was acting in reverse. He didn't even know he was acting. He was just whisked away to a fun place with guys with weird hair and lots of Muppets. The thing is, though, is that talking about all of the the kind of weirdness of this movie. At what point did you realize the hidden Jarretts in the movie? Like, how many viewings of this movie did it take you to realize the hidden Jarretts?
I noticed one, which is the rock formation.
Yeah, the rock formation is the thing, but like to this day, have you ever noticed the others?
No.
Yeah, there are like 7 or 8 of them throughout the film. And actually, if you go on Muppet Wiki and look up the main page for Labyrinth, they do have screenshots of all of them. Shout out to Muppet Wiki. We are not affiliated with them in any way, but man, are they a help when you're doing research for anything Jim Henson ever worked on. They are celebrating their 20th anniversary this year, by the way. So shout out to everyone at Muppet Wiki. They make our lives so much easier and so much more full of whimsy. But yeah, I saw a few of them when I was like on my first 2 or 3 watches of the movie, but it took me years to find all of them. And it's basically the rock formation was a practical set, which I think is why it's easiest to see that. But the other shots were done by compositing the same, I think it's even the same picture of his face into matte paintings. And so they would take David Bowie's face and they would composite the image onto the matte paintings and put it in that way. But overall, once you start noticing them, you realize like that Jareth is using his power to follow Sarah through the labyrinth. And it's really fascinating because it's even from like right there when she first enters the labyrinth after she talks to the worm, and you get that first establishing shot of what the labyrinth looks like. You can see his face in that. Like every time there's an establishing shot of the labyrinth, there's one going down into the oubliette. There's one, Sarah and Hoggle are on the little rock outcropping before they fall into the bog of eternal stench and meet up with Ludo. After the entire group, including Sir Didymus and Ambrosius, is finally together and they're finally on their way to the Goblin City. That's like the last time you can catch one, I think. But basically, there is Jareth is there kind of spectrally watching her entire progress through the labyrinth, which I love that they thought about and that they put it together,
he is a shapeshifter, so he could just be shapeshifting himself into parts of the labyrinth.
Yeah,
just
he
to
might
spy on her.
literally be those rocks or whatever. But the only reason I would say maybe not is because he actually does show up and physically leans against the rock cropping that looks like his face. So it's either that or either Jareth is an egotist who puts his own image throughout the labyrinth. Like maybe he's not actually watching her. Maybe it's just his equivalent of like propaganda posters. Remember, great leader.
Yeah.
Which, from what we know about Jareth, it's not far-fetched to think that he might do that,
A scene that oddly still holds up, although now looking at it, because we're looking at it on 4K, Blu-ray, TV and stuff. Yes, the chili down scene is obvious green screen. And it has to be because literally the puppets are taking off parts of their bodies and throwing them and whatnot. But the scene still holds up.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that one was done on a green screen or if that's black velvet puppetry, because Henson did a lot of black velvet puppetry.
A lot of it when you can see a lot of it if you ever watched his appearances on the Ed Sullivan Show. The original Muppet Show features a lot of that black velvet puppetry, so you're probably right.
Yeah, and I don't know, it could have been either, but the thing is that they've never really upgraded it and removed the matte lines that you can see around them in the scene when they composited the background behind the Fireys. Interestingly, 2 very interesting people, well, actually 3 that I can think of that worked on the Fiery scene. Two of two of Henson's children, because I think Brian and Cheryl both helped in the fiery scene. And then Kevin Clash is there, the original Elmo. Kevin Clash is there doing the voice and the main puppetry for the leader of the Fireys. Actually, Steve Whitmire helps puppet one of them. Dave Goles and Karen Prell also worked on that scene. But then the one of the main voices, including singing, because this is the only song in the movie that David Bowie wrote that he doesn't actually sing on, is the main voice in this is Danny John Jules, who, if you are a sci-fi fan, you will recognize as the cat from Red Dwarf.
Oh.
Yeah, also appeared, and maybe it's the way he got the job. He also appeared in The Great Muppet Caper, even though he was not credited. He is one of the dancers in that amazing ballroom dancing scene, and also worked with Frank Oz when they did Little Shop of Horrors. And so he knew Frank Oz through that. But he was still, this was just before Red Dwarf, I think, because I think Red Dwarf was like 87, 88 maybe. I forget. But this was just before he would hit it big on Red Dwarf. And there's a lot of really cool behind the scenes footage if you're the type of person who is a Red Dwarf fan and a Labyrinth fan and for some reason has not seen this. There are a lot of great background images of like Danny John Jules and David Bowie in the studio recording the song, everything. So it's really cool. It's one of the neat little things in the movie to me.
It's this being essentially a musical where the majority of the songs are sung by one person is done a lot better here than in certain other movies we've talked about, like, Tarzan.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that the problem with Tarzan is that none of the songs are actually what they call diegetic, which means that they're diegetic means it's happening within the universe of the film. So most musicals, you have these diegetic songs. The characters themselves are singing it. The reason I think it doesn't work in Tarzan is not because it's like one person doing it necessarily, but because nobody in the movie is actually singing these songs. It's just random guy pops in and sings a song,
And it's a musical, Brother Bear, same guy, Phil Collins. But it's just, it's a musical montage moment. Where here it is diegetic. It is literally David Bowie's character, Jareth, reciting these songs. When he sings about his magic dance, he is singing about, it's basically, I'm going to turn this child into one of us.
Yeah.
And then when he singing to Sarah, I move the stars for no one kind of thing. It's all him professing his love to her, but also wanting her obedience to him.
Yeah, I am just gonna take a moment to make a side note here for any listeners. If you do hear my dog barking in the background more often than his usual, we usually try to cut him out. But the thing is his name is Bowie, and yes, he was named for David Bowie, and he thinks we're talking about him during this recording, so he keeps wondering why I'm calling his name, and there's not like a requisite treat or something following it. So he's being a little bit more talkative than usual. So if we're not able to edit around all of his barks and whines and stuff, it's because he literally thinks we're talking about him right now and can't figure out why I'm talking about him, but I'm not interacting with him as much. So it's very cute. Yeah. We mentioned my fandom of this movie, but like, if you've never been inside my house, and no, that is not an invitation for you to come to my house, dear listener. I've got currently I am recording this in a David Bowie t-shirt in a room overlooked by posters of David Bowie, an autographed picture from Labyrinth signed by Brian Henson and Karen Prowl, various pop figures, various action figures, the Labyrinth board game, books about the making of Labyrinth, tie-in media, like my house is kind of an interesting trove of Labyrinth memorabilia.
Yeah. Ogle is a very interesting character, if you only want to talk about him as a character. By his own admittance, he says, I am a coward. I am not going to stand up to Jareth because I am a coward and I value life. But also, he doesn't want to harm Sarah because Sarah seemingly is the only person that's ever been kind to him.
Yeah, she gives him her bracelet.
He even says, after betraying her, giving her the peach, I've betrayed my only friend. Damn Jareth and damn me too.
Yeah. Stretching that PG rating there, aren't you guys?
Yeah.
But the fascinating thing about Hoggle and kind of about all the characters is they all have to learn something in the labyrinth. And there is an interesting conversation about, did the worm do Sarah dirty at the beginning of the film?
If it goes that way, if she goes that way, she goes straight to that castle.
Yeah. And people are like, oh, the worm screwed Sarah over, because if the worm hadn't have made her change direction, she would have immediately been able to rescue her brother instead of at the very last second, But the thing is that I don't think the worm did Sarah dirty. I mean, I don't think the worm knew in the context of the movie. But I really was not joking when I talked about the labyrinth being the friends we made along the way, because Sarah, if she had gotten to the Goblin Castle, say, within the first hour, instead of in the 13th or, whenever it is, because Jareth does speed the clock up at one point, so we don't know how long she was actually there. Sarah, if she had confronted Jareth at the beginning of the movie, is not the person who would have been able to stand against Jareth.
She wouldn't have been able to resist the temptation. Jareth was tempting her with the fantasy world she's always wanted. Isn't this what you've always wanted, Sarah? And I'm giving it to you. All I ask is for you to worship me, and then I will worship you.
Yeah. The thing about it is, though, is that it is, when I was a kid, and I still joke about it now, that like, Sarah's an idiot. What better offer are you going to get, But realistically, as an adult, and especially, I am going to say this from the perspective of a woman, because this so often happens in more, red flag abusive relationships, is that is the way that harmful partners tend to reel in their victims, is that idea of, as long as you live by my rules, I will treat you like a princess. But in order to have that, you have to give up any agency at all. And it kind of sounds alluring at first. It's why, like, the concept of the trad wife, it's like, you know what? I'm going to free you from all of the constraints of modern life. You don't have to worry about finances. You don't have to worry about a job. All you have to do is just stay home, babysit, and bake bread. And I will take care of everything else. And I will put you up on a pedestal and treat you like a princess. But the thing is that there is a saying now in the feminist community of, there are no old trad wives. Whenever you see these chicks on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, they're always like in their 20s. And it's because by the time you hit 40, you realize what a lie that life has been. And I come from a family that bought into that lie quite a bit,
And then, you'll see the 60-year-old man with the 20-something-year-old wife.
And what you don't see is the 40-year-old woman who has now been divorced by a man who thinks that the perfect wife must be like a good-looking 20-year-old who stays home and has babies and bakes bread, And so as her body ages out of being able to have babies and bake bread all the time and look like Marilyn Monroe while she's doing it, is that you get, you find these women who the men in their lives have discarded them, have divorced them. And what happens to the woman in that situation is she has no life skills. She has no job history. She has no money of her own. And suddenly, you find yourself in your mid 40s or, 50 or whatever, and you have been left for the next woman who will fall for that fantasy. And you are left, homeless and jobless, and you got nothing, And so when I look at what he is offering Sarah in this movie, even though it was not really a conversation we were having as a culture at the time, that is the trap that he is attempting to bring Sarah into. This, if you give up all your agency to me, I will treat you as the most precious thing in the world. And anyone who offers you that is offering something that cannot be. You cannot respect someone and treat them as a precious object at the same time.
Yeah.
And it is just part of growing up with this film, because, like, when I was a teenager, I was like, girl, you did the stupid thing. You had literally everything you could have wanted, and all it would have cost you was your bratty little stepbrother being turned into a goblin. Fair trade.
That is kind of the movie. There is a coming of age aspect to the movie. Right at the beginning, what starts the whole I wish the Goblin King would take you away is she goes in her room and realizes her teddy bear is missing. And that her parents had given the teddy bear to her little brother.
Which I'm with Sarah on. Like, that's why I say the parents are the worst. And I don't think it's just that, like, oh, we're seeing them through the subjective lens of Sarah. Like, they went into her room and took her stuff. Look at the house they're living in. You can buy that kid another teddy bear.
Like, but, to continue my point here, we see the teddy bear come back when Sarah lands in the trash heap with the trash lady. The trash lady pulls out the same teddy bear. Isn't this what you were looking for? Yes, this was what I was looking for at first. Because it was what started the whole thing, was that teddy bear.
Yeah, and that is the thing, is that Toby wouldn't have been crying at the beginning of the movie if she hadn't burst into the room screaming about the teddy bear. Because the father says before they left, we fed Toby, we put him to bed, he's sleeping, just make sure he's okay and we'll be home later, It's
also a thunderstorm and the kid is scared from the thunder.
Yeah, but it kind of, the thunder, we're kind of wondering, like, is the thunder the rainstorm we see at the beginning, which seemed to be just kind of like a spring shower or something, and not really a storm, until she starts waking the goblins and invoking, Jareth's title and stuff. So it might be one of his powers. He starts crying when she slams the door open in the room and is like, Lancelot, there's my teddy bear,
Implying that baby stole the teddy bear.
Yeah, she kind of does imply that, that the baby stole her teddy bear. But as someone who lived with a parent who constantly moved their stuff and threw away their stuff and all like that, this is one of the parts of the movie where I'm 100% on Sarah's side. At the end of the movie, she willingly gives the bear to Toby as a sign of love and bonding. But at the beginning of the movie, it's just her parents have gone into her room and stolen one of her possessions and given it to their kid, Which is, I'm not saying anything against blended families, but sometimes there is animosity. She's a teenager and suddenly she's got a baby brother because her dad went and remarried and got another woman pregnant, So you can kind of understand it.
Well, my point here is that we get this is another, now this could be part of Jareth's powers. This could be adding into is this a dream? But we get the trash lady puts Sarah in a complete recreation of her room. And she starts to believe, was this all a dream?
Yeah, because her memory has been wiped by the peach at that point, so that helps.
Yeah. But the trash lady starts basically making her a trash lady, putting all of her things on her back. Here are your dolls. Here's your pencil case. Here's your makeup. You
Here's
don't
a
want to
copy
lose
of The
that.
Wizard of Oz, which is very specifically one of the things she puts on Sarah, which I find interesting.
It's like, here are all of the things you like. You don't want to lose them. Essentially trying to make Sarah like her, with her carrying all of these things. Presumably they are all her favorite things.
Yeah.
Now, I don't like the wording that she says, oh, this is all junk. But I get the point. Like, these are just things, they're important things to her, yes, but at the end of the day, they're still things. What's important for her is she needs to find her brother. And she can have all of the things in the world, but that's not going to bring her brother back.
Yeah. The thing is that I often see the scene with the trash lady talked about as a way of like rejecting the nostalgia that a lot of us feel. And, and I mean, this podcast was started out of a sense of nostalgia, So it is very interesting to have this scene where people are like, look, the movie is saying that you should put away childish things and get to the adult business of life. Which seems that way until, one, you watch the whole movie, and two, you realize this movie was made by a bunch of people who played with dolls for a living.
Who wants to see dolls wiggling?
Yeah, it's like you can't look at a bunch of puppeteers and be like, well, that's the most adult person in the room. And I say that
But
having good
also-
friends who are puppeteers. I'm not
Yes.
saying that is a bad thing. I think it's great to be able to retain your childish whimsy as an adult,
In another way of looking at it, and I don't think anyone's ever looked at it, is if you go with the Wizard of Oz aspect of it. This is her room and her things. This is her, quote, reality, and she is rejecting the reality to go back into the fantasy of the labyrinth because she has to, because that's where her brother is.
Yeah. Well, the thing is I think the thing that kind of discounts what the moral, quote unquote, that people are trying to find in that scene is the ending of the film. Because, of course, she gets there and she's like, oh, it must have all just been a dream. I'm back home. My parents are coming in the door. Toby is asleep in his crib. Like nothing ever happened. Lancelot is still in the same place, basically, on the floor. And there is that moment where she's like, oh, I just dreamt it all, But the thing is that then she goes into her room and what does she see? She sees all of the friends she gained in the labyrinth. And of course, the important line is, if you should need us.
And again, it is playing into this is a fantasy because they're fading in and out. As each one is talking, Leto says goodbye, Sarah. She turns around and he's not there.
Yeah.
And you see, and they're all saying, if you need us, and they're all like fading in and out, each saying their lines, if you need us.
But the thing is that she says, I do need you. Her acceptance of the adult reality, quote unquote, where she is the caretaker of the child and, thinks about her family and, doesn't mind giving her old teddy bear to her little brother, blah, blah, blah. But that does not mean that, to borrow the phrase, that she has put away childish things, nor should she have to. It cannot be her entire life, but it can be part of her life. And I think that is the moral at the end of the movie, because yes, she sees them in the mirror, but once she acknowledges, like, I do need you, then the response is, well, why didn't you say so? And they are all there physically. Didymus is wanting to play Scrabble. They're having a pillow fight. I
do like that speech. Every now and again, for no reason at all, she will need to come back to the world of fantasy.
And I think we all do. I think that is a healthy part of life. Tolkien had a great quote that, I'll butcher, but I'll at least get the spirit of it, where he said that when he was a young man, when he was a child, he was ashamed of his love of fantasy because he thought it made him seem childish and he wanted to seem more adult. But as an adult, he would proudly read fantasy. He would write fantasy. He would let everybody know, I am the person interested in fantasy. Because he realized that it is not a marker of childishness to be interested in fantasy. It is a marker of childishness to try to control what other people like and do with their life. And I think that this movie is on the same level. It might have been C.S. Lewis, not Tolkien. My brain is now playing tricks on me, and I can't remember which of the two. They were really good friends, and they had a lot of crossovers. So in my brain, I kind of equate them. But the point still stands. And I think that was also kind of the point that Henson et al. Are getting across in this movie, is that it's okay to live in fantasy from time to time, but you cannot ignore the real world to spend all your time in the fantasy world. Jim Henson was whimsical and magical and all those other things, but he was also a really shrewd businessman.
Yeah.
I mean, he could adult with the best of them when he needed to, but he also had, the weird sense of humor and the whimsy and the love of things that were considered childish. And basically everybody involved in this movie had that same thing. I mean,
David Bowie collected comic books.
Yeah, well, David Bowie collected any sort of reading material. He used to travel with actual steamer trunks full of books when he went on tour. He was an avid reader. But yeah, I mean, it's why his son Duncan Jones directs like sci-fi movies and stuff. It's because his father collected comic books, and he would sit at home as a kid and read comic books to his son. And yeah, they were all like that. Everybody involved in the making of this movie was like that.
I mean, Jennifer Connelly, she's not just one Marvel character, she's two.
Yeah.
Betty.
Jennifer Connelly also believes that the reason we're living in the world we lived in is because David Bowie died. That is apparently a legit thing she said to her husband, Paul Bettany.
Canonical event.
Yeah, and honestly, when the entire Bowie fandom heard that, we were like, we've been telling you. The world ended in 2016, and we've all just been living in the aftermath of a really bizarrely specific apocalypse since then.
So what you're saying is that David Bowie was this universe's anchor being?
Yes. I mean, anchor being, deity, take your pick.
I mean, he did play God, so, go with that.
I mean, play is, yeah.
So before we wrap this up, we said the thing last week at the end of last week's episode, but the famous opening of Magic Dance, you remind me of the Babe with the power, you already know. Okay, I already started. You finish it in your head. That comes from another movie. That comes from a movie from 1947 called The Bachelor and Bobby Soxer, where Cary Grant is saying the line. And he says it to a woman, and they actually keep going for a while. You remind me of the man. What man? The man with the power. What power? Power of voodoo. Who do? You do. Do what? Remind me of the man. What man? Man with power. So, and they keep going with this for a bit. So I'm surprised no one's ever done that with the opening of Magic Dance, where they just loop that entire beginning part over and over for the entire song.
Yeah, another interesting thing about Magic Dance is if you listen, it's in the movie a little bit, but it's more obvious when you just listen to the track in its soundtrack version. There are in there points where it kind of goes to a shot of Toby, and there are these little baby sounds and stuff. All of those baby sounds are being done by David Bowie. All the little baby gibberish and stuff, that is all David Bowie, because they could get the actual baby to do any kind of sounds that fit in with the recording. So David Bowie just went into the recording booth and did a track, where it's just him in a baby voice, like gibbering and laughing in the background.
You know what? David Bowie could have been a great voice actor if he had kept going.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people discount him as an actor because they think like, it's the guy that danced with Muppets and put on the weird. But if you actually look at some of his more serious roles, the man had chops. I will, there is a lot of talk. It never really aired over in the U.S., but in England they actually got to see his Elephant Man performance on BBC, I think. But you know, if you look at anything like that, where he was doing kind of the more dramatic stuff, he really did have the chops as an actor. And the interesting thing is that if you take away the facade and you look at Jareth as just a very complicated villain, there are some really great choices he made for this movie that I don't think were on the page. There's a lot of interesting vocal quirks. He changed his accent a little bit for Jareth. That's not, it's very close to his speaking voice, but he changed a lot of his, vocal mannerisms and stuff for that. And there are just moments where you can see him like staring at various characters and the way his mind is working. And yeah, I mean, it really is very fascinating to go back and look at it just as a performance. And also we have to, just speaking of, the only two humans in this movie, Jennifer Connelly, this was not her first movie, but she is at the beginning of her career here. She's only like, 14 or whatever. And you could see the actress that she would grow into. And I was really happy to see Jennifer Connelly really get her flowers, as she grew up, because it's all here at the beginning. I mean, granted, it's not as honed, it's not as sharp as it would be in her adulthood. But man, we often talk about how like child and teen actors are so annoying and stuff, but you can see the actress that would eventually win an Oscar, and I love it about this movie is that a lot of actors would have come in and played this part in a much more like kind of two-dimensional thing. She's either petulant or she's the damsel in distress, But Sarah is a remarkably layered character, and if you just read the words on the page, that's not where it's coming from. Most of it is coming from Jennifer Connelly's performance and Jim Henson's direction. Honestly, one of my favorite things she ever did is like the most recent, well, one of the most recent things. She's I think recently I saw she was filming some new stuff, but the most recent thing I've seen her on screen in was she starred in Snowpiercer, the TV series. And her character in that is so multidimensional and changes. You start off like, is she a villain? Is she a hero? Is she just like an idiot that got caught in a bad situation? And I think there's like 4 seasons of that show, and her character just grows and evolves and changes. And, each episode you're like, I don't know if I hate her. I don't know if I want her character to bite it at the end of this. Like,
I mean, how many Jennifer Connelly movies have we done for the podcast? Rocketeer, Spider-Man, Hulk, Alita.
Yeah, I mean, she's been in several that we've talked about. And, I'm not going to say it started here because this was not her first movie, but I think it was the first movie where anybody took notice of her.
A breakout role, definitely.
Yeah. And sadly, while it would be like the breakout role for Jennifer Connelly, this would be the last feature film that Jim Henson would ever direct. And like I said, as Brian Henson pointed out, it is maybe the greatest tragedy of his life that he died thinking that Labyrinth was a complete failure. And it was just that, like, no, Jim, you were just ahead of the curve like you always were. Jim Henson and David Bowie were both people, David Bowie had a great quote about the future belongs to people who can hear it coming. And I think that both of them were the sort of people who always saw a few steps ahead. David Bowie was also like Jim Henson in the fact that there were several things that he thought were creative failure projects that were close to his heart. And it was just like, oh no, I was just like 10 years too early. And I'm glad at least that David Bowie and pretty much like most of the other creatives other than Jim were able to live long enough to see Labyrinth become celebrated and well loved and turned into a merchandising mega house and all the other things that it has been.
There was talks of a new Labyrinth movie, but Bowie's gone, Jim's gone. And, no offense, but that Dark Crystal Netflix series didn't quite live up to expectations.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that not in Jim's lifetime, but after Jim's passing, but while, David was still alive and everything, they had talked about doing a sequel to Labyrinth, that it had started to get noticed. The correct fan base was finally aging into it and starting to share on the internet how they felt about this movie. And they, Brian Henson and some of the other people at the Henson Company started talking about, do we want to do a sequel to this? And in the end, of course, as you know, they never made the sequel, but what they ended up making instead within the Henson Company was the the TV miniseries Mirror Mask. And that came from trying to figure out how to continue Jim Henson's quote unquote failed fantasy worlds that they were now realizing were not failures, they were just mistimed. And so, the Henson Company was talking about doing a sequel to Labyrinth. They talked about doing a prequel to Dark Crystal, which is eventually years later ended up being, what ended up on Netflix. But at the time in the 90s, they were discussing like, we've started to realize that people like both these films and that aesthetic and that side of the Henson Company. Let's do something with that. And they ended up turning it into Mirror Mask, which was pretty good, but I think also possibly mistimed. Should they ever do a sequel or a continuation of Labyrinth? I'm kind of hoping they never do. I kind of want this to stay as like a perfect encapsulated snapshot of a particular time and a particular vision. So I'm hoping that they kind of leave it as is. I like the tie-in media. Go ahead, make comics, write books, release toys, do whatever you want on that end. Make a video game, whatever. But maybe just leave the film as a film and try not to revisit that world in any sort of like big live action kind of thing.
I can dig a prequel novel, a prequel comic, but yeah, that's about it. That's about it. Don't just leave the film as. So let's ask the question, Kiki. Does Labyrinth have the magic?
I mean, are you expecting me to say no? Was that ever a possibility?
No, no. But yeah, I'll say it. This movie does have the magic, magic dance. But it's different than what we said. Last week when we talked about Transformers, we openly admitted that the magic is pure nostalgia. But coming into this movie, watching it again, there is a lot of great ideas in this movie. There's a lot of great techniques used in this movie, and the story itself is magical.
Yeah, I can genuinely say that in this rewatch, I found dimensions to the story that in those hundreds, and I'm not being facetious there, it has to be hundreds of watches of this movie I've done by now. There was a point in my life where I literally watched this movie every single day. So, yeah. But there were points in the story that I found a new angle of looking at them, even doing this for this rewatch. And there's not a lot of stories you can say that for, that you can be able to quote them and still find new facets to them each time. I mean, that's like Shakespearean level crap right there,
Yeah. But yeah, if you have not seen Labyrinth in a while or even ever, yeah, it's like everywhere. It's absolutely on every streaming service you can find. As far currently, Shout Factory has the distribution rights, and they made sure it was on every streaming service that there is.
And if you don't subscribe to any streaming services, a lot of these places are for free. It might be like free with ads or whatever, but you don't have to like sign up for a specific service. So you can find
It's on
lots of
YouTube.
copies.
It's on
Yeah.
YouTube for free. It's on Tubi for free. It's on Pluto TV for free.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so, definitely treat yourself, because I do think it is a treat.
As for next week, we are getting back into Disney-owned media, but it's a Disney-owned media that, again, is near and dear to the both of us. Futurama, Matt Groening's big follow-up to The Simpsons. So we get to talk about Futurama, a show that we've wanted to talk about for a very long time.
Yeah, there's a new season coming out on Hulu, and we're going to celebrate that season, which of course we will not have seen, and I don't even think by the time we drop the episode it will be available yet. So there won't be any spoilers for anything not available as you were listening to this, probably. But we will go back and talk about the Fox years, the Comedy Central years, and even the early portions of the Hulu run. So
yeah, so come back next week as we talk Futurama, and we will talk to you all next time. Bye.
bye.
Don't let the magic stop here.
Keep the conversation going. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at Rewatching the Magic.
We are also on Blue Sky, rewatchingthemagic.bsky.social. And new episodes are available at rewatchingthemagic.podbean.com and youtube.com/@rewatchingthemagic. Remember, the magic is for everyone.
It only stops if you let it.
We know that right now, things are tough.
But in the words of Jim Henson, the only way the magic works is by hard work. But hard work can be fun.
Check out our show notes for ways that you can help.